Scott Benton.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I beg to move that the Workers' Predictable Terms and Conditions Bill now be read a third time. I am absolutely delighted that we are here today to take a further step forward towards introducing a new right for workers to request a more predictable working pattern. Throughout my bill's passage, I have spoken of the importance of introducing this new right and tackling the issue of one-sided flexibility. While zero-hours contracts are an important part of the UK's flexible labour market, the 2017 Taylor Review of Modern Working Practices found that workers on zero-hours contracts, as well as agency workers and temporary workers, struggle where flexibility is one-sided in an employer's favour. Some employers misuse flexible working arrangements by scheduling or cancelling shifts with very little notice, leading to insecurity of hours and income for workers, or, in the case of temporary and agency workers, dismissal at short notice. Short notice changes to working patterns can be hugely disruptive to workers' lives, for example, when they are juggling caring or childcare responsibilities. One-sided flexibility can also create an unfair imbalance of power between workers and their employers, leaving workers afraid to ask for their employer for more predictable terms and conditions out of fear for being dismissed or denied future shifts. The issue of one-sided flexibility is particularly present at a time when so many workers with unpredictable working patterns are feeling the pressure of household living bills rising so acutely. The introduction of a new right to request a predictable working pattern will empower workers to start a conversation with their employer about their working patterns. And it will not only benefit zero-hours contract workers. Agency workers and temporary workers will also be able to take advantage of the new right. A qualifying worker will be able to make a request if their existing working pattern lacks predictability in terms of hours they work, the times they work, or if it is a fixed-term contract for less than 12 months. And my bill will not only benefit workers. During this bill's second reading, the Honourable Member for South West Hertfordshire aptly described the right to request a more predictable working pattern as a win-win for workers and employers as well. The new right will boost workers' satisfaction and productivity and allow employers to retain skilled staff. It is vital that we maintain the flexibility that zero-hours contracts facilitate for both businesses and workers, which is why workers will be able to choose to continue working on the zero-hours contract or in another form of less predictable work, if indeed that is what works best for them. Absolutely.
On that point, thank you, Madam. On that point, does my honourable friend agree that in certain cases it's actually more desirable, particularly the likes of students, to have that greater flexibility about when they can work around their studies, for example?
Thank my honourable member for his intervention. He is, of course, entirely correct, whether it be students who maybe have a different working pattern and different ability to work shifts to other workers, or indeed the rest of the general workforce. Zero-hours contracts are here to stay. They are an important part of the flexible working market, and rightly so. But of course, it has to work not only for the worker but the employer themselves. This is a positive step forward. It allows those workers who are working flexible hours to request a more predictable working pattern, but as I will go on to explain, the business in question, their employer, doesn't necessarily have to accept their request if, for example, it's too burdensome on the business. So I think this bill is a moderate and a positive step forward which works for both the employer and the worker themselves. The right to request a more predictable working pattern will function in a similar way to the existing right to request flexible working. For example, an employer will be able to refuse a request for a more predictable working pattern on specific statutory grounds, similar to those established for flexible working. I appreciate how important it is to balance new workers' rights with their impact on businesses, and these grounds will act as a safeguard to ensure that employers do not experience disproportionate burdens. My bill's clauses will introduce this important new right and ensure that it can be properly enforced. The clauses set out the eligibility criteria for the new right to ensure that as many workers as possible who have an unpredictable working pattern can benefit from this new right. All workers and employers who first work for their employer for a set period of time before they make their application will indeed be eligible. This period will be specified in regulations but is expected to be 26 weeks. Given that my bill targets workers with unpredictable working patterns, they are not required to have worked for their employer continuously during that period. Specific provisions will be made for agency workers given the unique way in which their working relationships with their employer function. For example, agency workers who make applications directly to hirers will be required to have worked for their hirer for at least 12 weeks continuously during the proposed 26-week period. This replicates a provision in the Agency Workers Regulations 2010, which states that after 12 weeks continuous service, an agency worker will gain entitlement to a set of employment rights which are the same as if they had been recruited directly. It ensures that workers cannot use the right to request a more predictable working pattern to circumvent the agency workers' regulations and gain entitlement to additional employment rights before they have worked for 12 continuous weeks. Employers' responsibilities are also clearly set out to support employers when they receive a request and to ensure that workers know what they should expect from their employer. Employers must deal with the request in a reasonable manner and notify the worker of their decision within 1 month. And my bill details the grounds on which workers may make a complaint to an employment tribunal, protecting workers effectively if their employer does not consider their request in a reasonable manner, wrongly treats the application as withdrawn, dismisses or treats a worker poorly because of their request, or rejects an application on the basis of incorrect facts. Workers will be permitted to make 2 requests for predictable working per year in recognition that workers' and businesses' circumstances can of course change over time. This will mirror the number of flexible working requests which will be allowed under the Honourable Member for Bolton South East's Employment Relations Flexible Working Bill. Together, my bill's clauses will create an important new right to request a more predictable working pattern which will carefully balance the needs of workers in unpredictable work and their employers. To conclude, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'd like to thank the Minister for confirming the Government's continued support for this bill, which of course delivers a Conservative election manifesto pledge. I've been delighted to see such broad support for my bill across both aisles of this House, and I trust that all honourable members will share my desire to ensure that this bill proceeds to the other place and we can take a positive step forward for working people.